Hey, what's up,
What's
dude?
up, man? How are you doing?
Pretty good. Just doing my own stream.
Right now?
Yeah,
Holy shit. So are we on your stream as we're streaming?
yeah.
That's crazy news, man.
Nice.
How have you been? I've literally watched your content, God, like years ago, dude, and I've not really kept up with you since then.
Yeah, I've actually just started getting into your stuff. I like it. The Connor Murphy
Appreciate
video where you're suspecting Tony Hughes and him might have played a role. It's plausible. Like, I've talked to Connor directly. He is weird. And the psychedelic crap that he got into, some people after doing that, especially very heavy doses for a long time, it can make them prone to violence. There's actually a big association between marijuana use, heavy marijuana use, and violence.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Tony Hughes, though, being a lawyer, he is a weird guy himself, and he kind of lives a bit on the fringes of society. It's not totally unbelievable, but I've actually had a few friends who know him, paid for some of his consulting. Again, I don't know him personally, though, right? Like, I'm not super close to him, so I don't know if he's the type of guy who would rage out and, like, plan a murder scheme.
I don't know, right? Like, it doesn't seem necessarily all there. I don't think anyone is if they have, like, a full harem of girls and, you know, like, the whole baby mama
He's
thing that
super
he has
into
going on.
ladyboys, too.
Yeah, like, they made this weird OnlyFans post with the ladyboy, and that just is really where I kind of was like, there's something going on, right? And I don't know what it is. I know that they both use recreational drugs, and I don't know if it's just a copious amount of recreational drugs and then just repeated abuse of those things that have developed psychiatric disorders.
I know he does a lot of coping with kratom. Oh, I'm not addicted.
Yeah.
I take it every day, but I'm not addicted. And I try every other different strain, but I'm not addicted. So, yeah.
And it's absolutely not addicting at all. Anyone can take this. It's fine. It's like, no, dude, like, it's very clearly addictive.
His advice on drug
really
use in general is just absolutely bonkers. He looked fucking amazing before he even started taking steroids. I was actually surprised why he'd even bother. That guy seems like he has some weird personal issues. Like, if I looked like that physique, I wouldn't bother.
Right.
And then on top of that, especially when he had that bald dude he was hanging out with for a while, they were recommending really weird drug protocols, like take massive amounts of human growth hormone indefinitely without stopping. It'll make you live forever. Like, there's weird shit going on, certainly with his drug use, that could definitely explain, like a murder plot.
Yeah, that's the way I look at it, right? Like, there's a lot of destabilized behaviors going on, and I just feel like I don't know if anything would have transpired that was truly like him causing the murder, right, or inciting people to do the murder for him. But I just feel like there had to have been some discourse between the both of them that wasn't healthy, and someone misinterpreted it or something. And because the way the bathroom was laid out, I don't know, right? And I don't want to get too far into this.
He heard the murder. Like, yeah. So I think best case scenario, he knew something about what was going to happen and did nothing about it. That's like the best case scenario.
Yeah.
Worst case, he had something to do with it.
That's what I'm leaning towards, because at the end of the day, if it's in your house, you're there with the police, you're there with the reporters, you're doing live streams like shortly after the fact, like a few days after the fact. I don't know. Not the kind of behavior I would be.
Well, bro, there's just no way you're literally next door to somebody. You can hear everything through the wall, and this guy's getting the shit kicked out of him, crap getting thrown all around the room, and then his skull literally gets caved in. And you don't call the police or do anything. Well, I waited 3 days, and I wanted to give him privacy. Like, yeah,
come on, man. Yeah. That's ridiculous. That's absolutely ridiculous. So what do you want to debate about, man?
Yeah, so, I'm vegan. Veganism's my thing. I think it's kind of not a talked about enough thing in the fitness world. Like some
Hmm.
people are talking about, like I am seeing more often people are talking about you need more fiber in your diet. Fruits and vegetables are really good. Stan Efferding is kind of warmed up to the importance of fruits and vegetables in your diet, but the ethical side is really important, and I think a lot of people are afraid of going fully vegan because they're worried about like soy having feminizing effects or not getting enough protein. So I think that's why a lot of people don't like really kind of jump on the vegan thing. So if you're interested, we can talk about the ethics and stuff, and maybe you'd be a little more interested in the nutrition side of things.
Yeah, I mean, the ethics side of it, I don't necessarily like the tough part is I don't feel an ethical debate even there because for me it just doesn't even really matter. And I know that sounds maybe cruel or inconsiderate, but it just really doesn't bother me to any extent that would make me care enough to even think about it twice.
Well, does
I
animal
will
abuse
say
bother you just in general? Like if somebody was kicking their dog?
absolutely, right? Like I have dogs, I love
Yeah.
animals, I have a service dog, but for
So I think
me,
it does.
there's a,
I think it does matter to you. I think you just haven't really thought about it much.
I mean, I grew up on a farm, right? And so like we would do slaughters and we'd kill
Yeah.
chickens and it never really bothered me. In
Well,
fact,
I
it was
think you're a
it was
little desensitized. It's one thing to kind of like feel an emotion from something, but I think if you thought about it, you would probably come to the conclusion that you can't really justify it.
I
So,
don't I don't I don't know. Like I just don't it doesn't bother me at all. Like
so
I
Yeah, so I a lot of people don't really understand what veganism is exactly. Like some people think it's just a diet. Some people, have different definitions. My definition of veganism is it is an ethical belief and way of life that seeks to grant animals the same rights as human beings if they were to be trade equalized. So the same way we would give, say, a mentally disabled human being, certain rights and protections under the law, they wouldn't be allowed to drive or vote, maybe necessarily, but they wouldn't be able to be murdered. They'd have to have a care or stuff like that. That's the same kind of idea with animals. Animals should at least have protections under the law against being murdered. Obviously, we wouldn't give them the right to vote, but you wouldn't be able to abuse, exploit them, stuff like that, like we do in the animal agriculture industry, especially with factory farming. So, what do you think
okay,
about
but
that?
my question is why? Like what is the purpose of having them be get those institutional rights in a sense where they can do these things and have these sort of privileges when in a sense they're not giving each other these conveniences.
Right. Well, same with mentally disabled people. They
Mhm.
can't really necessarily reciprocate rights or responsibilities, but we still take care of them. The fundamental issue for me is I don't see a symmetry breaker between humans, animals, or say any other sentient being. I mean, there could be aliens that exist somewhere else that may be somewhere in between human and animal intelligence. I don't see a significant enough difference between humans and the animals we're eating where I would be fine with taking away the rights of animals, but not okay with taking away the rights of humans. So I would like to hear some sort of symmetry breaker from you. Like, what is the significant difference between humans and animals where it's okay to take away rights from animals, but not humans?
Yeah.
Richard, if I may. This is just taking a slightly different direction on it. So let's go with that and say we instead of enforcing a law that animals have the same rights as humans. Everything from I don't know how far you want to take this, like an ant, or maybe like farm animals like a small chicken, all the way up to a dolphin, right? You enforced it that you're not allowed to kill, or in this case, we murder animals. How would you enforce that globally?
Same way we enforce animal abuse currently. So if somebody is seen kicking their dog, they get fined, jailed, stuff like that. Their dog might be taken away from them. Basically, same set of circumstances. And wild animals do have protection under the law. There are migratory birds, for instance, where you have to stop for them or else you get massive fines. I think it's like $15,000 in Canada if you run over a Canada goose. So same way we already regulate it now.
Okay. I mean, I can definitely understand, in working first world countries like Canada, the US, that could plausibly be enforced. But I would almost argue the whole continent of Africa and Asia, especially in
Human
cultures
rights
where,
don't even exist in those places. So, like, so
yeah,
I'm not saying it would probably be a good thing eventually if we had enough political interest and it was worth doing. Like it was, we had plausible ability to see good outcomes to enforce human rights in these regions, right? Like, there's places in Africa where gay people get killed. There are Muslim jihadist terrorist organizations that are genociding Christian villages, and then they have to flee to like Sudan. So I'm just like, we live in like the US, Canada. I know you're in Thailand and stuff right now, but in the developed world, it's definitely something we should strive towards. But like, back to the question, what's the symmetry breaker? Like, what's the like meaningful difference to you between humans and animals that makes it okay to kill animals but not humans?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's the symmetry is simple to me in a sense that one of them is very intellectual, has some sort of sentience, and can actually contribute to the world. Even if you are mentally disabled, there's a certain capacity that you have in the world. There's many people who have been disabled and had really great accomplishments under their belt. I believe that animals simply do not have this sentience. And taking that even a step further, if let's just say there was
just to be
alien
clear,
species,
if
there was like an alien species that was highly intellectual, like way more advanced than we were, the likelihood is that they might just see us as ants and crush us nonetheless because we aren't as intellectual as them. I don't even think that's wrong. Like, to be honest, now I don't think killing one another is great, especially in a same species context, but I don't necessarily think, an alien species of whatever type invading us and killing us is wrong. It's just their interpretation of their reality.
I think you do.
And it happens to be.
So I think you do think it's wrong. So you're against the Holocaust, correct?
Sure, but that's like species on species, same concept.
But let's suppose like Hitler had this idea that there's an Aryan race. And if you look into the lore, it in the Nazi lore, they were almost suggesting that there were like an entirely different race of humans. It's like their DNA was somehow like holy or godlike. Let's say we lived in an alternate reality where that was true. The Aryan race was far superior, was far more intelligent. Would that make you accepting of the Holocaust?
No.
Yeah, no. I don't think you really care about whether or not an alien race is far superior to us.
But they wouldn't care. Like, that's the thing.
Well, they wouldn't care, but it would matter to you.
Because one is a misinterpretation of another's perspective. What you're saying is if the Holocaust had circumstances in which would never actually exist, would it be appropriate? Well, I'm saying this as a human who would be doing this to other humans. No. But I think if, for example, an alien species was to invade the Earth and say, we want this planet because it has resources that we need. Oh, there's a pesky substance on this planet that is made of carbon and organic mass. Get rid of it. It's indifferent. Like, I don't think it matters. I also don't think that, harming animals to eat, while they are the animals that we are feeding as livestock, I don't think that's a problem either, because again, disproportionately so, we have more sentience than they do, as well as we need substance just as they do to live.
Okay, but back to the Holocaust analogy. Like, again, if the Nazis were like a super intelligent, superior race, you still would have a problem with the Holocaust.
If they were so you're saying if they were human on human interactions?
Well, again, we could consider them to still be human, but let's say they were a superior race of humans. So their IQ was better, species, they had better genes.
I don't think that's conducive to any cultural standpoint if they're still the same species. Well, neither would I if a lion was to kill a lion. It's not really conducive to the success of that species. Therefore, I don't see it as appropriate. But if a human was to be killed by a superior species that is completely different and completely detached from humanoid figures, then so be it. It's what it is.
And
I have no say over what they do.
Well, just
They
because
are
you have
under
no,
their own-
just because you don't have the ability to say convince them otherwise, that doesn't mean you wouldn't have a moral position on it. So is your
My
moral,
moral
position that it's
position-
okay to eliminate the human race as long as another species does it?
If we can't control it, yeah, I don't. What am I going to do, right? Like, the
Well,
only thing,
that's not what I'm asking. I'm not asking if you have the power to do it. I'm asking what your moral position is.
my moral position would be that it's indifference. I honestly don't see a difference in the matter.
So it doesn't matter to
might
you
happen,
whether or not the
it might
human
not
race is
happen.
exterminated.
No, I'd play no part in it at the end of the day. If they are eliminated and morally, for me, morally, like nothing
Okay,
in my
I
life
see
will
that
change, right? It
as
exists and it doesn't
a bit of a
exist.
contradiction because you just claimed that like farming animals benefits the human race and everything, and
It
doing
does.
things that are positively affecting the human race you prefer. So how would an alien race exterminating humanity further those goals?
It's just the pyramid of hierarchy. There's no benefit to the human race. The benefit to the human race is that, yes, we're taking advantage of a lower sentience being to fuel and compound our own nutrition, whereas the other, whatever, say like alien species, is likely doing the same thing. What I'm saying is we're taking advantage of a sentient species that is lower than us in a certain capacity. They're taking advantage of the same thing. I mean, it's, in my way, it's just the kingdom come. It's just how things are essentially in the wild space, you know?
Yeah, but
in the
just
grand
because
dark
that's the way
forest.
things are and you wouldn't be able to control it, you would still be able to have a moral opinion. So I don't know how you can say, one, I want to see
I
the
told you
benefit.
my moral opinions. I don't care. Like, I
Well,
don't
if you
think it
don't
matters.
care, then you wouldn't care about the benefit of the human species.
Right. I don't.
Richard,
So
add
you
another
don't care
point.
about benefiting the human species.
I genuinely care about the basics of socially being able to control. Hold on, I have to plug in my charger. Socially being able to, as a human being, live your life, but I don't necessarily care if something so existential happened that I literally couldn't do anything about it. Like, morally, to me, it is what it is. If an asteroid came and hit the Earth, sucks, but I don't really morally have an opinion about it. It's just, it happened, right?
Mhm.
I don't see these things as any different than you accidentally stepping on a pile of ants. Shit just happens as you're walking
Well,
around. I don't have
what
a moral opinion.
okay,
about it.
let's say an alien race were to try to kill us, but we actually had the technology and ability to stop them. You would intervene and stop them, right?
Yes, but that would also be killing another species.
Well,
which
right,
would be
but
against
they're
your morals.
violating your rights.
Sure.
So
if I
then
had
you
the
do have an
capacity
interest
to-
in humans existing.
I mean, if I was to sit idle and let myself die, that would be a different situation. So if you're asking me if I can fight back and I have the tools to fight back, I would fight back, as I'm sure animals would, but they don't.
Right, that's because they don't have the ability to. But
As we wouldn't
again,
have the ability
the
to.
fact that you'd fight back shows that you have a preference against humanity being destroyed. So I still see that as a contradiction. That one, you don't care that the human race would be exterminated, but two, you want to exist yourself and you want the human race to exist. So that's a contradiction. So clearly you would think it's morally wrong for an alien species to come to Earth and exterminate us.
A human species to come to Earth?
Sorry, an alien. Did I say human? I meant alien.
Yeah,
Sure.
I don't see that as wrong. Adam, you were going to say something?
Well, you clearly do. You
Yeah.
fight against them.
Yeah, just one position I'll be interested in, Richard. What do you think about animals eating and killing other animals?
Yeah, I think it's
How does
wrong.
that fit into this? I think it's wrong. So animals should be vegan too.
Yep. My cats are vegan. Well, they eat a vegan diet. My dogs eat a vegan diet.
What do you think about like an animal which is, historically always been a carnivore? Let's say a lion.
Yep. If I had a pet lion, I'd feed it a vegan diet.
Okay, now I don't know enough about animal biology, I'm not a zoologist to say whether certain animals can live on a vegetarian diet. I don't know. But from my understanding, given they've evolved over X amount of thousands or hundreds of years to eat a carnivorous diet, and let's say the case of a lion, I don't know if that would be biologically feasible for them.
No, it would. So my oldest cat, I think, is around 4 years old now. He's been on a vegan diet ever since I got him as a kitten when he was about 8 weeks. The only thing they need is nutrition, right? So it doesn't really matter what the source comes from. And especially now, like plants don't produce taurine, but you can artificially add taurine to food. So,
but is a lion going to be able to artificially add taurine to his food?
Well, not a wild lion, but we'd be able to do it for them.
But then how would that work? So would we have to put every wild animal in captivity and then over hundreds of years feed them vegetarian diets to change their natural instinct to not hunt and kill each other?
Well, ideally, we would have the technology to, say, engineer environments and ecosystems so that animals don't have to kill each other. So that would mean manipulating the genes of certain animals, changing the flora and fauna, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Look, Richard, I can appreciate the ethical point you're trying to make. I just think what you're saying in practice is so impractical for the current and even future state of the world. Like you said, it's yourself.
Well, I don't think it's impractical. I don't think it's impractical at all. And I actually think if the world were to switch to a completely vegan food system, it would benefit humanity. Most zoonotic diseases, well, by definition, all zoonotic diseases come from animals. So the latest COVID pandemic outbreak that killed roughly 7 million people worldwide, that came from the wet markets in China, the Spanish flu, which really should have been probably called the Chinese flu, because most evidence suggests that it came from China. That killed 50 million people worldwide. That originated from waterfowl, and that getting transmitted to chickens, and then us eating chickens, and then getting that disease. HIV, that came from people eating bushmeat, chimpanzees. Ebola, that came from close proximity to bats, and people might have actually been eating the bats. Along with polio, smallpox, all these horrible diseases came from animals, and that's not to mention just infectious disease outbreaks from the food industry. So like E. coli, listeria, I can name a number of diseases. Do you think a world with less pandemic disease would be a better world?
Well, that's a general question, of course, yes. But that doesn't have anything to do with the relation of this, honestly.
Well, it does. All these diseases originate from, animal product consumption. So if we didn't have animal product consumption... They might originate, but
they aren't propagated. They don't continue because of animal consumption.
No, they do. New strains of flu...
ability to tolerate the disease prevention. Like there's just not rules in place in certain places where this might happen, in which there is sterilization of environments. If
nobody ever ate bushmeat, never ate chimpanzees, HIV probably never ever would have spread to human beings. We would have a world without HIV. Though? Well, look, there could have been some weird circumstances where somebody had sex with a chimpanzee, but probably unlikely. But again, we probably never would have had HIV if people weren't eating wild animal meat. If we had never started domesticating waterfowl, we probably never would have had the flu, and that's killed hundreds of millions of people.
You're saying a lot of probablys, though, and this is kind of the issue is like, well, there's nothing able to be founded, and it's like there's ways, sure, but what are those ways? Like, how would you take humans out of the equation? How do we impact lions stopping the eating of meat? Who's going to feed them fucking taurine?
Well, again, I am really more concerned with what we can do personally. I don't know if we're going to really be able to.
But why do we need to be invading other species, like habitats, and especially their natural existence?
Well, if you have a problem with invading species habitats, the number one cause of deforestation and habitat loss is the animal products industry. So if you have a problem with that, then you should be in favor with ending the animal products industry.
It's estimated that agricultural processes kill like 7.3
Yeah,
billion
and
animals.
most of that comes from the animal products industry. So that's directly from the space needed by the animals, and that's also the space needed for the food they eat. Animals eat way more than us. A cow that gets to like 2,000 pounds has to eat way more food than you, and you're talking about a lot of corn and soybeans needing to be fed to these cows in order to get them to a weight where they can be slaughtered. So that's what's accounting for all of this habitat destruction. So if you're against encroaching into wild habitats and, destroying, all these forests, rainforests, stuff like that, then you should support a vegan diet, and not only for yourself,
Have you
but
ever
for the
been
planet.
on like a real farm?
I have.
Have you? Like
Yeah,
actually, like a
I
real
have.
farm with cattle and pigs and chickens?
Yeah, I have, and there's actually quite a few dairy farms around where I live.
Yeah. Richard, I have to agree with you. Like, for example, I do think certain factory farming is unethical and terrible. The conditions the animal left in. But I think the point Kolton is making is I do think there's a degree in the sense that if you are farming just like animals in their natural habitat are eating each other, which has evolved over thousands of years without any human interaction, okay? Because I don't think humans were the ones getting lions and other animals to eat each other. That was a natural, call it evolution, as part of their DNA. Okay, I don't think that's more of a ethical debate. I think that's just more of a biological debate. I don't think they developed that way because of ethics. I think they developed that way because of biology.
They certainly didn't develop that way because of ethics. But I'm ethically minded, so I don't really care necessarily about somebody's biology.
Right. We're talking not about people, we talk about animals here. And what I'm saying is, I don't think you can enforce your ethics on an animal. There's no concept of ethics, but rather
we
just
absolutely
a concept of
can.
biology.
We force our ethics on animals all the time. If a dog, like a pit bull, goes out and rips apart a kid, we put him down.
Sure, you could talk about a domesticated animal. We're not talking about an animal.
We do that with wild
in
animals.
Africa.
If bears come and attack people, we kill them. When gators come and attack people, we kill them. So we absolutely, force our moral principles on wild animals all the time. And again, number one cause of habitat destruction is animal agriculture. So that is also a way in which you're forcing your values on these animals. And again, you're forcing your values on the domesticated animals. They don't want to die, but you kill them anyway.
When you talk about like a bear, for example, and someone killing them, I don't think that's us enforcing our ethics. That's just us being, dare I say, the superior race defending ourselves. For example,
that's
if a bear
enforcing your ethical values. You have an ethical value to protect human beings. The bear doesn't care. You force your values on that bear.
I don't think
so. Let's say you're on the receiving end of that, bro. I'm just curious. Like, yeah, what part of that is ethical? So let's say you're on the receiving end. You're standing in the forest, and the bear's coming at you. What do you do?
Oh, I'd kill the bear. Yeah, it's self-defense.
Right? Isn't that more more self-preservation and self-defense rather than
it's self-defense. If I didn't have an interest in living, and I was suicidal, I'd let the bear kill me. But I have an interest in living. So it's
isn't that just more self-preservation than an ethical
Well, same
argument?
thing. I don't see a big difference between self-preservation and self-defense.
Sure. Is it about what we're saying is in self-defense and self-preservation, not an ethical question, more like a biological question? You have a will to live?
Well, I wouldn't say everybody has a will to live. I don't know if every single species, like I don't think plants have a will to live, but they, have some level of intelligence where they make sure they keep on living. But for me personally, I have an interest in living. So if a bear attacked me and I had a 44 Magnum, yeah, I'd shoot the bear.
What about plants which develop, mechanisms, whether it be like thorns or some sort of venomous part of them to preserve themselves? Does that mean that they have a interest in living and therefore it's an ethical issue?
No. So they're not sentient. Just because like plants have defense mechanisms, that doesn't mean they consciously interpret a threat, say, oh God, I want to live. I'm going to grow thorns. Oh, thank God the thorns protected me. No, like, bacteria they can form biofilms to protect themselves from antibodies. Doesn't mean the bacteria are actually conscious and thinking, oh God, I have to protect myself. I'll develop this biofilm so the antibody doesn't kill me. So I only care about sentient beings, just because like plants are living. Doesn't mean.
What do you define as sentience, though? That's also a really good question.
So sentience is defined as the ability to have a subjective experience.
Okay, and you know that plants can't have a subjective experience.
Correct.
How is that?
Well, again, we can make a series of inferences, and with a extremely high level of probability, we can conclude that plants are not sentient. So they don't have a brain, nervous system, nociception, all things that appear to be required in order to have a conscious experience, since all other organisms that have a conscious experience have those little bits and pieces,
So being sentient basically means that you have the ability to like make decisions.
No, you could be sentient and not be able to make any decisions. We could live in a deterministic universe. The ability for us to make decisions might be an illusion, and we're basically running as machines with a predetermined path. But we know we are sentient and conscious and can experience.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't. I'll be honest, man. It's not even.
You mentioned earlier, you have dogs. You don't like seeing animals getting abused. I mean, what is the big difference between your dogs and, say, like a cow or a pig at a farm getting its throat slit open? Like, you wouldn't want to see that happen to a dog, right?
Not my dog, right?
Well,
like in some places, that's going to happen regardless of me being there.
If you had the power to stop all dogs from getting killed and eaten, wouldn't you enforce that power?
No.
Really? So you're fine with like the Eatland Dog Festival?
I am control of my space. I don't want to have to input myself in other people's situations. If they choose to eat dogs, that is completely up to them. I'll let them do their thing.
Okay.
I'm not going to be a part of it, and I'm not going to associate with it.
Okay, but if you had the power to stop it, like literally with your mind, let's say you had godlike powers, you wouldn't stop it?
I don't want to intervene into people's lives because I selfishly have an opinion that they might not share.
Okay, so what if somebody had an opinion that they like abusing animals? They like kicking the shit out of their dog, ripping its skin off while it's fully conscious. You wouldn't intervene in that?
It is one of the human rights to have freedom of thought. So I would believe.
I think there's a difference between just abusing an animal because you're an asshole and eating an animal because that is your form of sustenance where you live. Take, some nomadic culture living in the desert, which is very arid, where there's not much vegetation for them to eat, and these people eat all sorts of fauna, around them. In a situation like that, I would not, as terrible as it is because we domesticate animals like dogs and things like that. If there were wild dogs and that was their main food source, then that's for them to eat it because that's what they.
Well, that's not the situation you're in, though. You could live perfectly comfortably, get all the nutrition you need from just eating plants. So for you personally, why would you want to contribute to animal abuse? Like, again, if you don't like seeing dogs or cats or anyone's pets get abused, and we're not just talking about like kicking. These animals get their throats slit open, and oftentimes a lot of countries don't use stunning methods, or even in like the United States, some of the stunning methods are horrific. They literally go into CO2 gas chambers where their lungs are burnt from the inside out. So they suffer horribly before they die. Why would you want to support that? Like, you could just eat totally plant-based and be healthy, happy, live your life.
I wouldn't be happy.
I think you would be.
I think we spoke about where if you have the means to financially, we do say support farmers who have quote unquote, you're going to disagree with ethical ways of farming if you can think that's possible, where I do think factory farming not only creates a poor environment for the animals, but I also think on some level is unethical too. And if you have the means to hunt and kill your own food, go for it. If you can support farmers or hunted to provide meat that way. I think that is a much better way of doing things. I think, agreed.
Well, 95% of animals in the US are factory farmed, and there's a lottery system when it comes to hunting. So even if you're an avid hunter, there could be multiple seasons where you're not even able to do any hunting. So that kind of solution is completely impractical. So there's just no way to live your life without supporting factory farming.
Animals.
Sorry?
Well, this is my point. If we could live in a society, just like you say, I want all wild animals to be vegan, and I'm saying that's impractical. Now, I am saying it would be great if we lived in a world where hunting and killing animals in a more humane manner, not factory farming, was ideal. If I could enforce that, if I click my fingers right now and get rid of
there's an even better alternative. Nobody kills anyone, and we can just eat plants and live happily, be jacked as fuck with 20-inch fucking guns right here, benching 410 pounds.
And for the record, I do think we can build muscle on a vegan diet. Obviously, I do think you can bodybuild on a vegan diet. I do think it's more difficult. But I do think that's all possible. So just putting it out there, everyone thinks you can't.
Well, if it's possible, why don't you do it? I mean, like, again, we're all against animal abuse here. We don't want to see animals get kicked around. We don't want them to be abused, kept in tiny spaces, get their throats slit open. You can choose to just eat plants. So why don't you?
I don't choose to do that. It's not enjoyable. I don't prefer it. I like a big fat steak. And if I had to slit a cow's neck open to eat a steak, I probably would do it.
Well, I mean, again, this, like, the way you justify that is I'm fine with aliens just destroying the whole human race. So, again, if you're ethically minded, that's clearly, not justifiable. If you have to go to the extent of saying, yeah, I'm fine with the entire human race getting exterminated.
How does that make me not ethically minded, though? I'm curious.
Well, again, you're fine with the entire human race getting exterminated to justify eating meat. So I don't think
if I have absolutely zero control and ability to defend myself, why even make any difference on it or inference in my own mind about it?
Well, again, somebody who's severely disabled wouldn't be able to defend an attacker who's trying to rape them or murder them. That doesn't make that, action ethical. So just because there is an alien species that would fuck us up just like we could fuck up somebody in a wheelchair, that doesn't make it ethical.
Sure. But they're also human. They're the same species of like species, right? And I think that's the big difference.
And also I think it's the difference between raping someone and wanting to eat someone for sustenance.
Yeah.
I don't see a significant difference because you acknowledged that you can get all the nutrition you need on a plant-based diet. So you're not doing it just for sustenance. You're doing it for pleasure. Just like how people commit rape for pleasure. So there's no significant difference there.
I said you can build muscle. How efficiently you can do that with animal products. Well, I think that is a debate there. I mean...
No, so there have been a few recent randomized trials that have come out. One was a clinical trial, not randomized, but they found that there was no difference in muscle growth, body composition, or strength increases between plant protein and animal protein. And again, don't mean to brag, but I'm fairly jacked. I can bench 410 pounds, 20-inch guns. Most people can't really achieve those numbers. So if the plant-based diet was holding me back, unless I just have horse genetics.
I think you do have horse genetics, You could be the vegan Ronnie Coleman for all we know.
Maybe.
Like there's people who do run androgens, lots of them, do run copious amounts of growth hormone and insulin and still aren't able to achieve those kind of numbers, right? It's not that you are doing this by the vegan diet. It's that you have a selection bias because you are genetically in a position to be able to do those things. You have some sort of propensity towards strength gains and muscle gains, which is a great thing. And I'm not, saying that you're...
I understand. The point I'm trying to make, though, is you're not going to die if you go vegan. Clearly, it can support muscle growth and strength. And if it was really bad for you, probably wouldn't be able to hit those numbers. But again, according to the data, there doesn't seem to be a difference between plant and animal sources of protein when it comes to body composition changes and strength increases.
I would say that there's also an equivalent amount of data that says just the opposite. I think there's a lot of confounding and conflicting data. Yes,
So
really. Like
there,
if we were
there
to
is
pull up
older
all the
research.
articles,
So yeah, there is older research. The problem with that research is they didn't control protein intake, and they also didn't manage branched chain amino acid intake. So there were massive differences in total protein intake and also just branched chain aminos. So if you have a vegan or vegan diet group consuming far less protein total, and their branched chain amino acid content is way lower, you're probably going to see a difference. But again, the more recent clinical trials and randomized trials show if protein's equated, then there doesn't seem to be a difference. There's also been some interesting aging studies. Sarcopenia or age-related muscle wasting is a big concern for the elderly. And again, there's been some large prospective cohorts that found that it doesn't matter what the source of protein is, it just matters that you're getting enough protein to prevent sarcopenia.
I would argue sarcopenia and muscle gain are very two different things.
They are
though.
different, but again, there is an anabolic effect of protein. It does prevent muscle wasting. If you can infer that data suggests that there's not a significant anabolic difference between animal and plant sources of protein.
I believe there is if you just look for it, right? I think the bias is that you look for research supporting your overall conclusion. Whereas if you were to look for research opposing your conclusion, you might actually find a lot of it that would
so over the last couple decades, there's been quite a few randomized trials comparing things like whey protein to soy, pea, rice protein isolates. Again, when protein's matched, doesn't seem to really make a difference.
What year did those studies come out?
So again, between 2020 and now, basically.
Okay. So
again,
likewise, I have studies pulled up right in front of me, the role of anabolic properties of plant versus animal-based protein, in which they conclude that animal-based protein, while not maybe as rich in fiber, does have more anabolic properties than plant.
Well, the problem is I care most about body composition changes and strength increases. So you can find some mechanistic research showing muscle protein synthesis postprandially is higher.
If that is the case, if that's what you care about, then we have a large cohort of people called bodybuilders.
Mm-hmm.
They all seem to eat meat.
Okay. There's a large cohort of the human population that smokes cigarettes. Does that mean cigarette smoking is, good for you? And I'm not saying animal protein is worse. I'm like, what I'm suggesting is it's just as good in terms of anabolism. So it would make sense if there's a cultural propensity to eat meat, and it's just as good at muscle building. You'd see most bodybuilders eat meat.
Do you have a six-pack right now?
Not right now. I'm currently dieting. I probably need to lose like another 15-ish.
Have you ever been lean enough to have like a legitimate shredded six-pack?
I got down to well below 10%. I was probably in around like 6-7% when I did a bodybuilding show years ago.
Okay. So I guess it's interesting because the things that you care about seem to also be present more so in populations that do eat the things that you think are not advantageous.
Like what do you mean?
Or at least ethically advantageous. Like you said, you care about strength and body composition. There's studies that show that there is a greater anabolic effect from animal proteins, but you said that's
that's mechanistic. That's looking at muscle.
You care about the results
postprandial.
But if we look at one of the largest cohorts in the entire world, what are they eating? In all strength sports,
that's not
Olympic
a cohort.
sports,
That's
powerlifting. Strongmen,
again, there's not a matched group. So if you were to show me a study where you have, two groups of bodybuilders, so let's even break this down. Has there been any top 10 Olympians or even natural Olympian bodybuilders who have ate plant protein only? Well, how many
Has there been any
astronauts are
top
vegan?
10 powerlifters?
Well, how many astronauts
strongmen?
are vegan? How many U.S. presidents have been vegan? Like you're talking about a niche sport that not many people do, and then you're talking about a niche diet that not many people do. You wouldn't expect to see many
performance
vegans.
sport, from tennis even.
Actually, one of the world champion tennis players is vegan. I think I think she actually won gold at the Olympics recently. There were a few medalists at the Paris Olympics that were vegan.
Maybe define it as more so a sport which requires large amounts of muscle mass. So strength sports, I would say.
Well, sure, but again, strength sports are extremely niche. Like, we care about them a lot, but nobody watches powerlifting. Nobody knows.
I agree. We're not saying it's not niche, but we're not saying it's niche, but like this is the niche that we operate in because it's an interest. So you're trying to make an argument that endurance sports can't be vegan. I think it might even be more beneficial as long as they have that base level of muscle mass.
I would say vegan diets are probably more beneficial for endurance athletes because of like vasodilative properties of plant foods and stuff. I would agree there too. But the point I'm making is like bodybuilding is a very niche sport. Not many people do it. Not many people do vegan diets. I'm postulating there isn't an anabolic difference between plant foods and animal foods. So when we live in a culture where it is just culturally normal to eat meat, you'd expect bodybuilders to almost entirely, just be meat eating, and you'd expect to see most Olympia competitors to like eat tons of meat. Just because that's culturally normal and there's no anabolic difference. So why would they, go on a plant-based diet? So
that's where competed in bodybuilding or anything like that. Have you ever competed in any strength sports or bodybuilding?
I did a bodybuilding show. I think it's been pretty much exactly like 10 years now. The judging was fucked. The guy who beat me, who I think came in third, he didn't even have abs. Like, I was fucking peeled. He was bigger than me, but no conditioning whatsoever. I came in really peeled, shredded, great body composition. If you look at my like profile photo on YouTube, that was me 2 weeks before the show. So I was looking fucking good. Not Olympia caliber, obviously, but I was looking pretty good for a natural athlete who just, just does this recreationally.
Yeah. No, I'm not saying you don't look good. I think you look great. I just think that the large swath of people is probably they're probably eating meat, and as of that, seeing success, right? So I mean, yes, I'm not arguing against the fact that you can eat a plant-based diet or entirely plants and then still get gains, but I'm arguing that there's an interesting selection bias. Like, people choose to eat meat and seem to do very well in competing, and it's an interesting fact that is maybe a bug and not a feature, but to me it seems more of a feature.
Well, again, there's no particular reason to think that. If you look at true ileal digestibility, there's very little difference between plant and animal foods. It's usually only like 1-3% difference. If you look at nitrogen balance studies, the slope and intercept for nitrogen balance identical between animal and plant foods. When you look at large prospective cohorts on sarcopenia, again, no difference between plant and animal foods. And when you look at clinical studies on the difference of plant and animal foods when it comes to body composition and strength changes, there doesn't appear to be any differences when protein is matched. So that all suggests to me that plant protein is just as anabolic. And again, since we live in a culture where meat eating is just the norm, you'd expect most bodybuilders to just eat, meat. We might have a day sometime when there's an Olympia bodybuilder who ends up going vegan. It's entirely possible. I don't know if that would end up really changing your opinion on anything. Like, you could always use the excuse, well, he's a genetic anomaly, he's on a ton of gear. That's why I don't really care much about that data. Like, this idea that, well, all the successful people are doing it, it can lead to some stupid things. Like, you can see in motorsports, everyone was having air intakes that were blowing air from the top of the engine down. Well, when people started making cars where the air intake was going at the bottom of the car up, that created more downforce. And then you could take, corners way faster. In bicycling, there was a lot of really stupid theories when it came to rolling resistance on tires. There was like a huge trend of cyclists using like 23 millimeter tires that were super thin, super hard, but they thought because it created a smaller contact patch, that would be faster. Well, again, when data came out and we started testing this and seeing the physics of rolling resistance, it turns out thicker tires are better, especially when you match it with a rim that's wider. So just because successful people are doing it, you could have like Tour de France winners with a 23 mil tire. He would have actually been faster if he used a thicker tire and went against the grain. So just because a lot of successful people are doing things, that doesn't necessarily mean that's the best way or the only way. You could get as much or if not better success doing something else.
Yeah, and I would agree with you, but I think
Yes.
one more thing. I think this cohort is unique in the fact that we would almost leverage anything to get more further progress. And experimentation is a big fancy of the cohort at large. It doesn't matter if you're successful or not. And I at least would hope that these groups of people would have at least tried something different to see if they could precipitate any amount of
When
progress
have you
within
ever
any
seen Ronnie Coleman try like a vegan diet, right? This is a guy from Texas,
right, and we
Barbecueville.
can't point to success, as you said. We can point to the fact that there's millions of bodybuilders. They're not all Ronnie Colemans, but they all try different things to get progress.
So the pushback against that would be, I think there's very few bodybuilders who just out of curiosity tried a vegan diet. And on top of that, if they didn't see any benefit, they might not have seen any downsides, but if they didn't see a benefit, why would they stay on the diet if they just liked meat, right? So if there's no difference in anabolism, but this diet you don't like as much because you don't get to eat the foods that you like, you wouldn't stick to it.
Richard, what's that YouTube bodybuilder who went? Sorry, what's that YouTube bodybuilder? Is his name John Venus? I want to say he was vegan.
Oh yeah, that jackass! I fucking hate him.
I don't know too much about him. I just remember he was a vegan bodybuilder for a long period of time, and then put out some content saying it basically was inhibiting his ability to gain muscle. Now, obviously, that's a sample size of one in someone's anecdotal experience, so we know it doesn't really count for shit. But interesting anecdotal experience nonetheless. Someone who was vegan for a long period of time and bodybuilding, and then stated that it was, inhibiting, his ability to make progress.
You can actually find anecdotes of the exact opposite. Patrick Baboumian, he was the Germany's strongest man, I think for 2 years. He also had the German log press record at one point. And he also broke a world record with the yoke lift, like back in the 2010s or something. He actually said he was worried that if he switched to a vegan diet, he'd lose strength and everything. But when he switched, he actually got stronger. His performance improved.
Was he using anabolics?
Yeah, well, yeah. He was using anabolics the entire time though, so that wasn't a factor that got modified.
I think
he could have increased the doses. He could have added different compounds, peptides.
That's the problem, right? When we start putting in...
Well, again, you're just saying these anecdotes don't matter because we can always find some excuses. Yeah. Like I could say John Venus is just a fucking retard or something, right? So...
Yeah, sure. I agree with that. I agree. I'm not putting any weight into these anecdotes. I think...
speaking of bodybuilding, since we're on the topic, there's been a lot of bodybuilders who have died, gotten heart disease, stuff like that. One big risk factor for heart disease is obviously LDL cholesterol. Eating
that
all
does
that
not exist. LDL cholesterol does not exist. That is a calculation. Lipoproteins, like low density lipoproteins or high density lipoproteins.
Okay, well, we could talk about ApoB specifically. We can talk about total particle count. So ApoB, if you'd prefer, if you want to get extremely technical, ApoB is the actual protein carrier of the cholesterol molecule. If you're eating a lot of meat, especially red meat, that's higher in saturated fat, you are going to elevate your serum cholesterol score, and that is the principal risk factor for heart disease. So some of these strength athletes and bodybuilders, you might want to find alternative protein sources like tofu or, beans, lentils, seitan is really good. That actually has very similar macros to just meat. So if you can bring your cholesterol levels down, you can prevent some of these, heart attacks that are killing bodybuilders.
Sure, you could. But I would also argue you don't need to be eating high saturated fat content foods that are also, you could eat lean meats, for instance. You could eat fish, which is a big
The
favorite of us.
problem with eating lean meat, however, is that most of the cholesterol in the food is contained in the lean muscle tissue. So
do you
cholesterol
realize
itself,
how much cholesterol you're actually able to absorb through your small intestine, though? It's a very small fraction.
So it's
meaning like pick one receptors. Do you know how much that actually is percentage-wise?
Yeah, so it's about 10 to 15%. But if you look if you look at the data, there's a really good N. Hopkins meta-analysis on this. Going from a daily cholesterol intake of about 500 milligrams per day to 0, for most people, that will lower their LDL cholesterol or ApoB by about 10 to 15%. There are some hyper responders.
Are also immobile. They're immobilized. They're unhealthy, and they're generally not.
That's just in normal people. So.
Yeah. So I would say your argument has no value, because at least for me and Adam, we look at hundreds of lab interpretations I would say every 6 months, I see at least 60 lab interpretations where I have people get lipoproteins tested, all of the lipoproteins, and then the particle counts between each. And I find typically, even with people eating red meat, that lipoprotein B is not elevated, which is my most concerning pathogenic molecule.
What do you mean by elevated?
It's not outside of reference range, and it's certainly not even in the elevated
reference range. So reference ranges aren't
I understand what the reference
ideal.
range is, but it's not at the upper end of the reference range, right? And I think that
what we
see is that these people generally improve health when they restrict saturated fat content, or in general content of any fat, because they stop eating as much. And most people are fat as fuck.
Well,
so if you stop people from being fat as fuck, it does reduce total cholesterol. It does reduce total triglycerides. It does improve insulin sensitivity, all of which are things which correlate as well to cardiovascular disease. So I would argue that it's actually not as much of the cholesterol directly as more of the calories and the exemplary examples that we have in people who are insulin resistant. So via the copious amount of calories that they're consuming.
So you are kind of technically right here. Dietary cholesterol alone is not the most significant factor on your lipid profile. It's below saturated fat. But again, you could reduce your cholesterol score by about 10 to 15% on average, and there are some hyper responders. They seem to be about 10 to 20% of the population, where you see even greater reductions of around 20 to 30%. So that kind of reduction in cholesterol does significantly reduce heart disease risk over time. So that is still something you would want to be interested in. And on top of that, plant sources of protein also contain fiber. Fiber also lowers your cholesterol score even further. So when you're talking about replacement,
there's also there's also phytolipids, right, which also contribute to your total cholesterol count. There's also an inverse U curve with total cholesterol, where if you have too little, you also you do develop. Yes, there is. You do develop. This is
I can explain why.
Solidified.
I can explain why.
Mendelian randomizing control trials.
Actually, Mendelian randomization studies debunked that idea. When you look at Mendelian randomization studies, people with genetically lower cholesterol levels live longer, and you actually see a greater presence of those alleles in elderly populations, because the people who don't have those good genetics, they end up dying. So Mendelian randomization studies have actually debunked that idea, and there has actually been a very good study published where they accounted for reverse causation. So they included things like lag time. They got rid of anybody who had diseases like cancer. And again, they actually didn't find that inverse U curve.
So in your mind, then, the longest lifespan, like let's just say super centenarians, what would your lay of the land be in terms of their dietary intake normally?
Well, actually, the oldest living population currently known today is the Californian Adventist vegetarians. I think they have an average life expectancy of 87 between both men and women. They live on average 10 years longer than your average American. There is the Okinawans in Japan. They have a greater amount of centenarians, so people living over 100, but their average life expectancy is actually lower. So the reason you see so many people in that population living to over 100 is probably more to do with genetics. There's just a greater amount of people with those sorts of alleles, like, you know, low cholesterol, stuff like that. Some of it might have to do with like, you know, small religious minorities. A lot of them are Buddhists, so some of them like are actually strict vegans. They won't even eat fish. So that might have something to do with it too. And then there's Hong Kong. They're very long living, but it's only the women that live particularly long. The men also live long, but not quite as long as the women. So the population with the highest average life expectancy is the Californian Adventist vegetarians. So if I were to make a dietary recommendation for people if they want to live the longest, it would be a plant-based dietary pattern, high in fruits and vegetables, lots of beans and lentils, tofu.
So where would you get your omega-3 content then? Because I mean, we all know that alpha-linoleic acid is very poorly converted into a usable form of
so there's a lot of kind of controversy around that. The best research suggests that it might have either no benefit or small benefit when it comes to heart disease prevention. As far as the populations that seem to be most benefited from EPA DHA, it'd probably be pregnant women and children. I haven't really seen much compelling evidence that in adult men or women who are not planning to become pregnant, that it really improves any health parameters. There might be a small benefit, but I haven't seen much. If you are interested in getting EPA DHA on a vegan diet, and you don't want to rely on your own conversion, you can just take an algae-based DHA supplement. That's where the fish get it. The fish actually don't produce EPA DHA. They get it from algae. So you can get it directly from the source, and EPA DHA supplements also aren't contaminated with pollutants that are found in fish. So might actually be a safer source.
Well, I have to go, unfortunately, guys.
No problem.
I can't stay on all night. But I appreciate you getting on, man. This has been fun.
Yeah. Interesting discussion. I like your channel, dude. I'll keep watching. Maybe we can have another talk some other time.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah. Bless your hearts. I do have to go, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're watching the live, Adam, thank you for being here from South Africa currently and risking your life. Thank you, Vegan Gains, for stepping in and having a conversation with us. And yeah, thank you for the fucking swaths of people that commented and viewed. So I appreciate you all. Have a beautiful night. All right.
All right. Take care, dude.
Guys.